Well, good morning. Thanks for coming this morning to our next innovation lecture series. It's especially nice today. We have several guests with us, and we're also going to recognize some of our challenge owners and the team members that participated in some of these first pilots for innovation. So we'll recognize folks that have contributed to this first pilot series. So our speaker today is Mr. Bill Gerstenmaier, and my boss, Mike Coates, is going to introduce Bill, so I'll invite Mike to come up.
Thanks, Jeff. It's truly a pleasure for me to be able to introduce NASA's Associate Administrator for Space Operations, Bill Gerstenmaier. Bill began his career at the Lewis Research Center, which is now called the Glenn Research Center, in 1977. He came to JSC in 1980 and served as a propulsion officer in the Mission Control Center during the early space shuttle program. Occasionally, Bill still mentions that being a prop was the best job he ever had. He quickly worked his way up the management chain, becoming manager of the Space Shuttle Program Integration in 1998, and in 2002, he was named the International Space Station Program Manager. He was asked to move to headquarters and become Associate Administrator for SOMD in 2005, where he is today. Bill's a proud graduate of Purdue University and has degrees in aeronautical engineering and mechanical engineering. He has twice been awarded the Aviation Week and Space Technologies Laureate Award for outstanding achievement in the field of space. He has received 2 NASA Exceptional Service Medals, the NASA Outstanding Leadership Medal, the Presidential Rank Award for Meritorious Executives, and this year he received the Rotary National Award for Space Achievement, the National Space Trophy, in April. It's been said that nobody is indispensable, but Bill may be the exception. If he wins the lottery, we're all in trouble. So we're trying to keep him too busy to buy lottery tickets. He's the heart and soul of our human space program and is the kind of leader this country deserves. It is my pleasure to introduce our AA for SOMD and an old friend, Bill Gerstenmaier. Bill?
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike. You know, before we kind of begin today, I'll give you a little background on what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk kind of generically about innovation and give some examples from kind of the outside world of things that are going on in an innovation standpoint. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I don't have answers for these questions. I'm not really an expert in this subject, but I get to kind of watch it from the side. I get to watch and see what space and life science has been doing. I get to see what others are doing on the outside. So this is a very intriguing topic for me. I think it's something that we really need to start institutionalizing to put innovation more in our projects. So this will be kind of more of a dialogue or open discussion with lots of questions. So if I accomplish my purpose today, you will come out of here wondering about what I said, thinking about some more questions, and probing more where innovation really goes. So you won't get any answers, so you won't be disappointed if I don't give you the answer at the end. So the title's When Organizations Should and Should Not Innovate. And how do I do this? Oh, oops, I'm going to go back one. Okay. So the first discussion is really what is innovation, right? I think there's a lot of terms that get thrown out. It's a very popular subject right now. You see it in literature every place. I'm going to spend a couple slides here, and I'm going to talk to you about what I think innovation is, and it'll be my definition. So as we go through this, you'll kind of get my definition of what innovation is and how it fits in overall. But I think we need to be very careful when we talk about innovation. It's a very popular term, but what does it really mean, and how does it apply to what we're doing? So we need to really get a common understanding of what is innovation, and I'll try to do that in the next couple slides. I went out to the web and I just searched kind of around to see how many times innovation showed up. And it's really an overused word. If you take a look at the little slide up in the one corner, the Google search, there were 129 million hits for the word innovation, which is pretty phenomenal. I also just grabbed titles from various topics out there on the web that show up. Innovation shows up all over the place if you go look at it. And then just for fun, I went to our program project management document. It's 7120.5, and I did a search in 71.20.5 for innovation. And compared to the Google web search of 129 million hits, I got one hit. And that hit's kind of intriguing. It said, this is the only sentence that has it in the entire document, and that's how it governs all our program and project management within the agency. The only thing it says is NASA's most powerful tool for achieving mission success is a multidisciplinary team of competent people who employ best practice processes. The agency will build high-performing teams that are committed to continuous learning, trust, and openness to innovation and new ideas. That's it in the entire document. So I think we need to think about how we bring innovation into our processes, into our normal program project management processes in some way. This sentence obviously doesn't cover at all what we're going to talk about later or what I'll talk about in the future. It's just not there in the document. So NASA, we need to figure out how we can put innovation into our standard processes and our normal way of doing business. You'll also notice for the eagle-eyed folks up there that even Jeff Davis's name made it up there in the highlights on the web. So I don't know what that means about the web, but Jeff is definitely there with innovation. So this is intriguing to me. So let's talk about some definitions of innovation. First of all, from Webster, right? The introduction of something new, a new idea, method, or device. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. From the alternate information dictionary, Wikipedia, innovation is a change in the thought process for doing something or the useful application of new inventions or discoveries. It may refer to an incremental, emergent, or radical and revolutionary changes in thinking, products, processes, or organizations. You know, when I look at those two, I think really the key things about both of them is innovation is about change. So we're doing something in a different way. That's a piece of innovation. Another thing that comes out of both of these a little bit, and maybe a little stronger in the Wikipedia definition, is it says innovation is about utility or usefulness. So it's not just change for change's sake, but we actually have to think about how we want to do the innovation, how we target the innovation, and then force the change into the organization in a useful or utilitarian way. You know, if I look at these two, I think the Wikipedia definition probably captures my thinking more about what innovation really is than the Webster's definition, because it captures the pieces of, you know, incremental, emergent, radical, revolutionary changes in thinking, products, processes, or organizations. So I think it's much broader in a sense in the way I see innovation than the Webster's definition. Oops, but I want you guys to think about that too as you go through your thought process, and what do you think is the definition of innovation? And then I also went out and I looked at, again, is from a management perspective. So I went out and read Drucker, and what is, you know, I wanted to see what he thought about innovation. And above all, innovation is not invention. And I'll spend a couple slides talking to you about that. You know, innovation is a term of economics rather than of technology. And I think that's really important. It has an application out there. It actually improves the process. It helps with the bottom line. It allows you to do things more efficiently, more effectively. It allows you to do things that you couldn't do any other way. So it really has a purpose for you, whereas an invention would be just a device or a new technology, but it doesn't necessarily have economic payback or doesn't necessarily support the organization. And I think that's very, very, very important. And I'll talk about it in the next couple slides, but I think an example of an innovator is Thomas Edison, and I'll give you some examples of that. I would say Tesla, who did the electrodynamics, was much more of an inventor who did products. He spent his own money to develop those products, but he didn't target them towards an application and didn't create a new industry or a new innovation towards that direction. So again, I think if we think about innovation, it's, again, economics, or it has return on investment, has benefit back to the corporation. If you think about invention, it's a pure technology. Then that technology can then later become part of innovation. So that technology can get picked up. It's a new way of doing business from a technology standpoint. But then when it gets integrated into the organization, then it becomes an innovation. So again, I throw all these thoughts out for you to think about and ponder as we go forward with innovation. So what this means is, Drucker's saying that anything that increases efficiency in an organization is innovation. And he also states at the same time that his principle is that innovation occurs when an organization does things to move them closer to the future vision of what the organization could or will be. So it's a piece of strategic planning in a sense. When we do our strategic planning, we ought to be consciously deciding where we want to put innovation in our processes, where in the life cycle of a program or project do we want to interject innovation. We need to target innovation in certain areas to where we want to go put things in place. So, we should be asking ourselves really in a strategic planning sense, what is our business? Where are we focused on? What does NASA do? What does your program, your project, your directorate, what is their primary mission? What is it, what is it today? What will it be? And what it should be? And that's the strategic planning. Where do you want your organization to be in 5 years, 10 years? Where do you want to position yourself to move forward? Then how can you use innovation to drive you faster along that progression change in strategic management? So I think what Drucker's telling us here is that just as we do strategic planning, a key piece of strategic planning and designing a project from the beginning should include innovation and how we're going to interject innovation into our processes. And so I think, again, if I ask you to talk about strategic planning, what do you typically do in strategic planning? It begins with an analysis of opportunities. We go look at the future. We go look at areas that we want to go pursue. Where does NASA want to move human spaceflight? Where does NASA want to move research in space? We analyze those opportunities. So it's conceptual and it's perceptual. We've got to make it simple that we can understand that, focus it. Then we've got to take the innovation and target into those areas, start small, and then keep moving into those directions. I will also say that there's some innovation innovation is not random. Right? It's wrong if innovation is random, in my opinion. We ought to make sure that it's intentional. It is an act that we are doing on purpose. We are moving it into our processes. We're using it to drive change. We're using it to drive towards the strategic vision of where our group is going in the future. So again, we need to be careful that we don't look at it as just something that just happens. It needs to be really well thought out and put in place. And so now I'll go back a little bit about kind of the title of my charts where I talked about what to innovate and what not to innovate. And again, I coined a term creative management. That's maybe more continuous improvement. It's what we do every day. In other words, it's how we improve the way we do business. So you could think of it like a Kaizen effort, maybe a Lean Six Sigma. How do you take a process and improve that? I would call that creative management. How do you improve risk management? How do you improve cost functions, business return on investment? The standard things we do every day in business, that's kind of normal creative management that we have to do to stay viable. We're balancing, in a technical sense, we're always balancing the cost of a project, the schedule to deliver the project, and the technical content in the project. As a program project manager, you're always balancing those three. And that's our normal standard creative management. And I would say that I consider that a piece of innovation. So even though the title says creative management versus innovation, I really think they're the same, but it's much more of a structured, incremental, smaller piece. And that's absolutely necessary to keep moving forward. But then I would also argue that innovation is, we've got to actually move us towards this future vision in the organization. So we have to be essentially breaking down the organization, maybe in a change sense, doing things a different way, being destructive, tearing down some of those processes that used to work, look at a new way of doing business. And again, my thinking is that these are not mutually exclusive, but they both have to exist. You can continue to refine processes till you get to a point, then you will peak out and you will not gain any more efficiency. You cannot, you'll gain some stuff initially by just doing Kaizen, Lean Six Sigma activities. You'll get efficiencies down, you'll reach some plateau, and then to move again, you're going to have to need an innovation. You're going to have to break down those processes and then start that process again. So it's an incremental piece. You do creative management first for a while until you've reaped all the benefits out of that. You've got static control. Then you figure out the right time in your project when you can now do a little more creative things, actually break down those processes you worked so hard to refine, and then innovate in a new direction and then continue to refine those. So I think it's actually a continuous process of doing both of these things together. So now let's kind of go back to NASA a little bit, and let's look at Apollo 13. And this is kind of a thought question, right? You know, was Apollo 13 creative management, as I just described to you, right? Was it creative problem solving, right? Or was it innovation? And you guys need to think about that. You know, it was within a field, right? It was within the space field. So it was a group of experts that got together that figured out the way to scrub carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to keep the crew alive as they were returning back from the moon. But how did they do that? Was it, you know, I coined the phrase innovation by desperation. We're good at that at NASA sometimes. We only innovate when there's no other choice. After we've exhausted every other avenue we can, we'll then go ahead and innovate. So was this an act of desperation for us to save the crew, that we had to innovate and figure out a new way to scrub out CO2, to make a round duct fit into a square duct and blow the air through the lithium hydroxide to remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? What was there? You know, was it innovation by necessity? Was it extreme problem solving? You know, what really was it? And again, I'm not sure I have an answer here, but I think, you know, maybe that the overall flight control team structure, you know, and the training philosophy that we put in place for Apollo, that provided the framework that allowed this team to innovate in this very constrained short amount of time and actually solve the problem and get the crew back safely. So I would say the success of Apollo 13 wasn't that particular event, but it was actually the processes and systems that were set up before that created an environment where the team could come together in a very short amount of time, creatively come to a solution, and there was only a finite window to get the solution exactly right, or the crew was not going to be around. How could they figure all that out? So I think the process was there in Apollo, then the team structure, the team training, the way we do business and flight operations allowed that innovation to occur. So if we did it back in Apollo, I would argue the same thing can be done today in program and project management. We need to start thinking about how we put together projects and programs, go back to our 7120 document, figure out a way to enable innovation in the way we do, so then when it's the right time in a life cycle of a program or project, we can innovate at the right time. So we need to kind of, again, look back to Apollo 13 and then understand why that allowed to work the way it did, and then how we can move forward. Again, I think innovation, there's a couple of dimensions. You know, it's not the day-to-day creative management that I discussed earlier. I think there's definitely different types of innovation. There's disruptive innovation, there's discontinuous innovation. You know, disruptive would be a product or process that emerges, you know, below an existing business, eventually replacing it. So, you know, in other words, the whole business may go away and you head in a totally new direction. There's discontinuous, where it disrupts the way things are going. The program project may no longer be the same. It's now heading off in a slightly different direction. There's incremental, which is small changes in existing products and services, maybe the creative management piece. And then there's radical innovation, which provides, you know, maybe only one or a small subset of the change. So I think there's different dimensions of innovation. We need to think about these, think about how to use them when they're appropriate in the right time frame in our projects and life cycles. But we need to use really all of these dimensions. It's not right to just do one. It's not right to just do the process management, process control aspect. I think we need to be openly looking for the destructive aspect and the discontinuous aspects. You know, now I'll talk a little bit about invention and innovation. This is a quote from Thomas Edison. You know, I find out what the world needs, then I go ahead and try to invent it. So if you've captured innovation, that's what he's done. He's done his market analysis, right, on his own in some way, shape, or form. He's determined where he wants to go in the future. Then he's going to go try to get a product or service that goes there. You know, and then he further goes and says, anything that won't sell, I don't want to invent. Its sale is a proof of the utility, and utility is success. So when I stated earlier that Edison was a true innovator, I mean, if you read these quotes, and granted they're selected quotes from all the things he said, but they really drive home the fact that he was really pushing towards innovation in the truest sense of innovation. And what he was really driving was the innovation we think about as a light bulb, but I'm not so sure it was really the light bulb. It was really the electric distribution system that provided economic value to the nation. So it wasn't the light bulb itself, but it was the ability to distribute electricity throughout everyone else. We think about it as, we hear the stories about him trying to find a filament that lasted longer, and we hear about, 9,000 trials that didn't work, and he finally found one that worked. We talk about that, but I think it was really the fact that he was setting us up for this whole architecture. If you think about all the electric lines, all the utilities, this whole infrastructure that was there was the huge piece that he pushed forward. So in a sense, this was truly, radical and disruptive, game-changing innovation. Some of his other quotes are pretty amazing. He said he wanted to make electricity so cheap that only the rich will burn candles. So what an insight. So immediately he's thinking about the market. He knows the price point of the market. If it's so expensive that it's going to not compete with candles, right, it ain't happening. So he's already set the constraints strategically of what he's going to do with this distribution system. So he is really thinking ahead and gaining and vectoring his entire energy towards building this system to distribute power. So this is a true innovator. The other thing, going back to the light bulb example, is, it's often talked about all the filaments he used. He used carbonized cotton. He used some other things. But then I was reading in some of the excerpts, and he finally found a few threads of a bamboo fishing pole that he was able to carbonize, and that actually gave him the longest burning filament, and it was 1,200 hours. And he thought of this while he was in the state of Wyoming, and they were doing an astronomical observation, and he was fishing with a cane pole. And he saw how the cane pole broke into threads, and then he got the idea that maybe one of these threads, if I carbonized it, might be the new element. So you talk about him actually innovating in a strange world, or inventing creatively in a strange world. Here he is out in Wyoming fishing, right? And if Edison would have had the web or incentive, right, he could have bypassed this fishing trip, and he would have got to the solution on the bamboo pole. But he didn't have the luxury of those things, so he had to go use a creative environment. So my message here is, I think we need to think about what our strategic goals are, what we're doing, and then no matter what we're doing, we need to creatively figure out a way to brainstorm to keep moving in that same direction. Some other things, a little more current things that are going on here. This is our information technology stuff that's happening to us. In the top left, you'll recognize the BlackBerry, and the right, you'll see the iPad, and then you'll see the Android down in the bottom. Again, this is really taken off fast. I think the BlackBerry was probably the first disruptive innovation. And I say disruptive in the purest sense of disruption. Not only did it change the way we do business, we've now figured out a way to actually work 24 hours a day, actually have no free time, not be able to think about cane poles and bamboo strands, right? We're too busy pulling that device out of our pocket to answer some crisis email about what's for dinner at home. So, but it definitely came first. But then my point here is that first isn't always necessarily the best. It came out first, showed that there was a market for this stuff, and then quickly the iPad came along, and the iPad is now moving fairly strong in that direction, but it looks like now the Android is probably going to surpass the iPad, and we'll see how this comes about in the future. But some of their marketing schemes of making it more open, getting a better user interface, they're able to build off of that first piece. So I think that the point of this is that you don't have to be there with your first innovation. You can come in second. I would also argue that some companies specialize in this. They let somebody else come out and take all the risk of doing that first development and putting the market out there. They let somebody else market test BlackBerry to see if there is really a market out there. And then once that market's established, then they come in behind, they can refine on that, and then they can blow away that guy that's first to market. So we need to collectively think about what's our right strategy. Do we need to be first to market with a new innovation, or do we let somebody else go push that, and then we'll come in later with our NASA stuff later? So that's another dimension that we need to think about as we go forward. So it's not necessarily to be there first all the time, but to be there. Now the problem is that I'm kind of wired that I'm not a risk adverse in any way, shape, or form. So I'm kind of the person that wants to push that thing out first and then let somebody try to catch us later. And I think maybe that's part of that NASA spirit. So we need to think about that, where we're willing to take that risk. And it's also about, is it right for NASA to take that risk as a government agency, or is it better for a commercial company to take that risk? And in some cases, it's better for the government to take the risk, because if we fail, it's not detrimental to our corporation. But we need to be able to move forward and think about that. But the purpose of this slide is really to just think about the way innovation occurs and the timing of the innovation in the marketplace. Now this one is kind of fun for me. This is an invention failure that led into an innovation success, right? So if you think about it, here's this guy who works for 3M, whose job is to make glue that sticks. And he makes this glue that's pressure sensitive that peels right off and doesn't stick, right? So he's failed in his invention, right? But and it was not easy for him to get this through. I again went out and researched this a little bit, and he went for 5 years. He went to the board of 3M and told them, hey, look at this great product I've got. And they didn't know what to do with it, and they just told him flat no. And then he finally got one of his partners in the company to actually agree to use an innovative side of 3M where they could actually take this to market and then try it. And they took it to market, and again, it failed. And his partner used this little Post-it note to stick in his hymnal to keep track of where he was in the page, and it worked very well. But again, even though they got approval to go try the innovation, they tried it and it failed. So then their next approach was that, well, nobody knows how to use these devices. So then they went to, I think it was Boise, Idaho, and they provided 500,000 free samples of these things to the residents of Boise. And then only after that did they then catch on that these things are useful. People invented new ways of using these Post-it notes, and then it took off, and then it became a marketing success. Then they went back to 3M, and then it became adapted. So I think what the message of all this is, we need to think about, even though we're rejected right at the beginning with our ideas or our innovation, you may have to go out and create a market and show folks how to use these devices or how to use this technique, because it's so foreign or so disruptive to what they're doing every day that it's just not going to make any sense to the public in general. So if you're going to be a leader and you're going to push new technology, especially in our world, right, in space exploration and other areas, we're going to have to go out and explain to folks how they can use this technology, how it can benefit them in the future, but then maybe even more important to that is actually let them experiment with the technology, let them use it, let them understand how they can apply it in new and creative ways. Then that creates a market for what we're doing. So I think we can learn a lot from the Post-it note and how difficult it was for this failed invention to get out there to be an innovation. The other thing I found was really funny was that they couldn't find any, they became yellow because they had the store next door to them where they were going to actually manufacture these things for Boise. They had a surplus of yellow paper because nobody wanted yellow paper. So they went next door and grabbed all this yellow paper to make their Post-it notes for Boise. So you talk about a little bit of serendipity that sits in there, right? It then highlighted the benefit of it being a highlighter, right? Like the little yellow markers you put in. But that was not planned by them. That was not part of their marketing strategy. So no matter how well we try in all these things, right, we still have to, there's a little element of luck or a little element of serendipity that has to be there to make things work. Now I'll talk a little bit about kind of in our business a little bit. This is again another Thomas Edison quote. Always keep on the lookout for novel ideas that others have used successfully. So in other words, he's out grabbing things from wherever he could go find them. And in the upper left-hand corner is our minus 80-degree freezer on board space station. That's where we store our saliva and blood samples and on station, and we keep track of the DNA and other things. And then Jeff and some of his folks were down, I guess, went to the San Diego Zoo, and they found out that they're storing DNA samples for animals in a gel. And so what the gel does is it extracts the water out of the DNA samples, and you can rehydrate later and then regain the DNA. So what this potentially does for us, and we're still not exactly sure this is all going to work, but it looks like there's a potential here to do away with all our freezers. So where we were storing all these samples in the freezers, it looks like we now may be able to store these things in this gel and then restore them back. So we've been spending millions of dollars developing minus 80-degree freezers, building transportation systems to carry frozen samples to and from space. we were heading in this huge infrastructure, this huge market was heading that way where we were going, and now here's this disruptive technology that just does away with all our freezer development, right? So that's going to be hard for us to adapt because all the freezer developers of the world do not want to give up on their freezers. They love freezer technology. And they'll keep pushing that state-of-the-art, and that is a state-of-the-art device. It's got a little Brayton cycle about as big as my finger, a little Brayton engine in there that actually keeps the fluids at minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. So again, we need to keep looking for other areas. So the message of this is, it may not be in your field, but if you reach outside your field, you go look at somebody else that has similar problems. How are they solving the problems in their field that's different than yours? And then you got to be willing to accept it, and then we're going to have to force that disruptive technology back into the system, and the system is not going to want to accept that disruptive technology. You know, it's going to be hard for folks to adapt and accept this. It still hasn't occurred yet. I'm sure there'll be lots of debates about which one is better, which one isn't. You know, does it really preserve the DNA in exactly the same manner? Do we lose anything? We'll have to go through all those processes, but I think it's there. But the message is, we just need to keep looking. We just need to keep pushing out there, stay creative, and keep looking for things in the future that might be in how other people solve the problems that we face in a slightly different way. Again, you know, we're trying to do, and Jeff's organization is doing really good, is how do we more standardize exactly what we're doing? In other words, how do we go out and use tools and processes? How do we grab innovation without us reinventing everything in the future? And I think you'll hear some more of this today. You'll hear the success stories of the folks that got awards and things today. We've been trying some different things with Top Coder. We've been using Incentive. We've been using Yet to Come. Each one of these are a slightly different model to go reach out, to grab people, to grab a community together, a group of solvers that can go work on a problem. There's different advantages to each one of these. Certain problems are better tailored to other ones. The crowdsourcing works well in some places. Some of the software tools to code, and Top Coder is good for some software problems. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to experiment in kind of almost an internal innovation sense about which one of these tools is best for which applications. We're doing lessons learned kind of things. I was in a meeting this morning where we're talking about that. How do we figure out what is the best tool for us for whichever application? How do we write the challenge? How do we work with these companies and these web interfaces to get the absolute best out? So what we're going to try to do again is, first of all, you know, as I said at the very beginning, accept that innovation has got to be part of the way we do business. It has to be embedded into our structure. Then how do we use tools, use web interfaces, use other companies to help us then reach out to these other folks to bring in more innovation in things we do? So I think we're still learning here. You'll hear more of this discussion in the future. Jeff's been doing a great job of trying to do this. Harvard's been very good, and we've been working with Harvard as well. They've been using us as kind of guinea pigs. We let us try certain things to try different avenues. They can then look at it from an academic standpoint. Did this work well? Did this not work well? And move forward. Again, I'm also a big fan of little failures are okay. So you may actually learn more from a little failure than you do from all successes. So we need to go look kind of retrospectively, what caused this to fail, what caused this to work, and then figure out the best way to go do things and move forward. Now talk a little bit about risk. As you know, we have to be careful how we take risk. You know, NASA has a hard time pursuing innovative projects because we're risk adverse. But I don't know that that's really the case. You know, what is risk, right? It's the probability of failure, right? As well as the consequences of the failure. So, you know, we have a little 2x2 matrix or plot where we plot all our risks, and it's a consequence on one axis and then the probability of failure on the other axis. So if the consequence is low, the probability of failure can be high, and you're probably still okay. If the consequences are extremely dire, you lose the crew, you lose the spacecraft, you lose your mission, you lose your project, then you need to look very carefully at where the probability of failure sits. You don't want that to be high because you're in that red zone then where, you know, a very likely failure could cause your entire project to get failed. And the risk is also exposure to danger, right? In other words, that's the consequence side. You know, what are we doing by this activity? And the key is really to manage the exposure side, or to manage where the consequence is as much as you can. So can you have a backup system, a fallback system, a backup process, something that sits there to go do that? You know, I think a lot of people think innovation is risky. I don't think that that's necessarily as true as it is. It may be, and you'll see on my concluding slide that I think that it may be just as risky to not do innovation as it is to actually do innovation. And then you can also say that, poorly executed innovation can increase uncertainty. If you take, for example, the new Coke debut by the Coca-Cola Corporation, right? That didn't go so well. That was a new innovation. But again, they probably read Gene Kranz's book where failure is not an option. They didn't give up when new Coke tanked. They figured out a way to turn that in, that old Coke was really the best thing ever going, and we're going to bring it back in, and we're listening to you. So they took this marketing disaster, right, and they figured out a way to spin it into a marketing plus and actually increase the notoriety of regular Coke and actually get a bounce out of this negative new Coke experience. So my discussion there is that even though the innovation of new Coke appeared to be a failure initially, because they were creative, reactive enough, and fast enough in their marketing, they were able to take that failure and actually turn it into a plus and move forward. So we shouldn't be afraid of innovation. And if we get a failure, step back, think about what that failure means, and how can we use that failure to drive us in a positive sense or move in the right direction. So don't give up, even though we see something that doesn't come out exactly right. I think a Google model is, fail fast and fail well. I don't think we can say that in NASA. That's probably a little too far, but I think you need to think about that and then how we move forward. And again, I think the message here is innovation is not random, as Drucker said. We need to consciously think about where we want to do innovation. We need to think about what the exposure to risk is if that innovation doesn't work. We then, in typical NASA fashion, we need to have a backup plan if it doesn't work right. How do we move forward? How do we move that next step? But we need to keep moving forward in innovation and not just adhere to the axiom that innovation is too risky. And again, if we go back to my process discussion, where I talk about like a machining or manufacturing process, you don't want the technicians, trying a whole new way of operating a machine for the first time when they're making a $1 million part that's had 100,000 hours of work on it before this technician gets it, and now he's going to have a creative day and go play with this part. That's not going to happen. But if you could do the Kaizen effort, you could do a Lean Six Sigma, then you can do a structured innovation that allows you to go move that in a very controlled process. So I think it's really not right to talk about risk. So again, I'll kind of wrap up here, and then I probably got some time for a couple questions, and I can see if you guys have some questions. Some things I would, you should ought to take away with you, right, is I think, first of all, we must include innovation to remain competitive and relevant, right? But more importantly, we need to help it to find the best solutions, and it can augment creative management. So what I'm saying there is that innovation needs to be embedded in what we do. It needs to be as part of continuous improvement. Innovation needs to be structured in all our projects, no matter where they are in the life cycle, from the project development all the way to a mature project that's turning out a product at the end. How do we need to definitely put innovation in there and use it. I think we need it, especially to stay competitive and relevant. I think it also can help us with the way we reach out to the broader community. We talk about participatory exploration, where we let the broader community experience what we experience in space. How we, the team reward here is extremely high. You spent maybe 10 years getting that spacecraft on the launch pad ready to go fly. And then in a single instance that actually goes and flies and it does its thing, that you've invested 10 years of unbelievable hard work and it really works. That sense of satisfaction is huge. How can we broaden that out to a larger community beyond us, the folks that work in the space industry? How can we let the folks on the outside understand how difficult our business is, how hard it really is to do these things? You see these things occur at the end. They look like they were just done today. They don't realize we've been working on things for 3 or 4 years. We're talking now about winding down the shuttle program. We've been actually doing that for 4 years. We've been in detailed planning for 4 solid years to do what we're about ready to go execute, which is fly our last remaining shuttle flights and still keep station viable. That didn't come about by accident. That came about through 4 years of hard planning and negotiations with folks. The outside folks don't get a chance to see that. So I think we can use innovation to bring them in so they can participate in our processes and gain more insight in what we're doing. I think innovation needs to be tailored to the problem and the organization's environment. So it needs to be, again, part of the strategic plan. The organization needs to be receptive to this. It needs to be tailored in that way. Sometimes disruptive may be good. The consequences of disruptive maybe too big for an organization at some point. We need to figure out where the right place is to go do that. The next point is disruptive innovation will fight the mission and may modify the value structure. And then discontinuous innovation may change the mission and the value structure. So my point there is that in the true sense of change management, when you do innovation, you've got to be really receptive that this innovation may change what you've been doing. And you need to be recognizing that by moving in this new dimension, you're actually moving more towards the end goal you want to actually accomplish. So we may give something up that we cherish, but if our goal is to do more human spaceflight or take better care of crew on orbit, that's the ultimate goal we're trying to. How we get there and what institutions and what organizations support that goal, those may change radically when we go do some of this innovation. We need to be willing to accept that. But then we're doing that because we're going to get the better human spaceflight goal. We're going to take better care of our crew on orbit. So we need to recognize that higher goal, and those processes and organization changes may get, in my simple words, get trashed on the way to this new thing. But then we'll move into the new organization and move in new directions. And then the last point is really deals with the risk side. You know, I would think the cost of not innovating, you know, may exceed the cost of failing in the introduction of an innovation. So we shouldn't be afraid of innovation in any way, shape, or form. I think by us not innovating, as we see in our 7120 document, we may actually have set ourselves up to be in a worse posture than we would if we were actually out there to go innovating. So hopefully I've given you some things to think about, some things to recognize in your own business. You'll see some more tools. We'll recognize some folks for what they've done here today, later in the award ceremony. But again, take these points to heart, think about them a little bit, look for ways to be innovative, creative, think about some of these points, ask some more questions. You can definitely dialogue with myself or anybody, and we'll figure out a way to keep moving forward. So if we're going to continue to keep moving, we're going to keep innovating. It's part of our nature. It's the way we move. So with that, I'll answer any questions, and thanks.
Let's see, Bill, you touched on it briefly, but some of the barriers to innovation seem to be cultural change, right? You hit that at the end there. And in a lot of cases, we're our worst enemy. I think we're not devoid of great ideas, innovative ideas that are bubbling up from all different folks. It's implementing them. And do you have any words for us on implementation of innovative ideas? Because there's not a shortage in the agency, I can guarantee that.
Again, I think, you know, the way I try to characterize it is we're going to have to show that by accepting a new innovative or creative idea, you know, we'll see the downside. You know, the organization may change, the way you may lose some control in certain aspects, but then we need to really stress the positive side. We need to do this with a couple small projects at first, and then let us see how they go so we get through this scary process, right? You learn to swim, or you learn to gain experience by doing small little pieces, and then you get to the bigger stuff. So we're not going to get the big radical change right up the bat, but if we can get some small things, like maybe the freezer thing starts moving forward, or some of the other radiation experiments or food processing, if some of those take hold and we can then interject those back in our systems, we can start realizing that innovation is not that scary to us. It's actually a way to enable our mission in a much more effective manner. So I think it's going to take a while to get there. It will not happen anything. It will not happen overnight. It's a cultural thing in a sense. But I think this agency, like you said, has a lot of folks that are extremely interested in innovation. I mean, that's what drives us. That's why we're here. We're about doing the tough things in space that nobody else wants to go do. It takes, you know, innovation, right? We're never given enough money to go do any project we're ever given. We have to figure out a way to get it done with the funding resources we've got. We're given constraints that are unbelievable that most folks would shy away from. So we really have a culture of innovation already, but how do we institutionalize it more and start it in small steps and keep moving forward? But I think you're right. There will be pushback. There will be folks that don't want to go do this stuff, but I think if we can do some small pieces like Space and Life Sciences is doing, some of the other things we're moving forward, I think we'll eventually get to where it becomes more of our day-to-day processes. And you'll see a structured way of putting innovation into our project management document instead of it being that one little paragraph that I read to you at the beginning. But it'll take a while.
you kind of already alluded to it in your response, but not to be too over-bureaucratic, but what would you say as a rule of thumb for how much time and how much dollars should go into innovation?
Again, I think we need to, we need to think about that, right? I mean, we need to do our strategic planning, lay out where we want to go, and then make sure that we're going to commit what investment it takes to go do that innovation to move forward. So I think, again, innovation is not random, and so we shouldn't be investing in innovation hoping we're going to hit the jackpot somewhere. We need to have structurally decided and strategically decided that we're going to do innovation in these areas and then move in that direction. How much of our funding goes to that area? I don't know. We've been doing it pretty lean now. We've been leveraging a lot off of folks on the outside. So we'll just see how it goes and evaluate it and see if it becomes there. But I think we still need to think about as an agency what our primary mission is, what our primary goals are. How can we use this tool to push us in that direction, and then how much then kind of logically decide how much investment is worth it to try to push for those, and then monitor and be retrospective. See if we're getting the kind of gains we want. See if we're seeing the things that are there as we continue to move forward. Okay.
Thank you for talking about Edison's his vision of what electricity is for the entire population, and was able to market something that was very useful. I wonder whether we as a NASA, as an agency, do we see the same kind of desire or end product that what NASA is engaged? And is there something missing that's why sometimes we have this cultural barrier and the change that's preventing us to be innovators?
Yeah, I think sometimes we as an agency don't do a good job of talking about how space is really becoming part of everyone's daily life. For example, GPS has become pretty synonymous with everyone. People will drive their car wherever the little GPS device tells them, right? Even if it's in the middle of a cornfield and they were supposed to go to some hotel in Iowa, right? If the GPS told me to go there, it must be right, so they just drive there blindly. So they've adhered, they've really adopted GPS, and if you ask somebody, well, where does this come from? They don't kind of realize that space and satellites and satellite navigation and all this has really come from the space industry. The same thing even with all the cell phones and all the technology devices we have. Typically, there's always a satellite hop in there somewhere. There may be fiber across the ocean bringing some of the signals, but there's still typically some kind of satellite hop in there. Again, people don't recognize that. Weather predictions, hurricanes, I guess we're tracking a hurricane in the Gulf, right? Imagine if we didn't have the satellites available to give us that information on the weather prediction in the Gulf and where that's going to be. That folks are upset that we only know within a couple days of this storm's approaching. Well, it just formed in the Gulf yesterday. So we're pretty quick, and it's our satellites that are enabling that. But I don't think we've done a good job of connecting with the population in general about what the benefits of space are. In the new era on space station, our astronauts experience bone loss over time in space. They lose about, I think, 1% of bone per month on orbit, and somebody will correct me. And then they also have immunology problems where their immune system doesn't quite work as well in space. And what's interesting is the elderly have that same kind of problem. As the elderly population gets older, they also lose bone loss. Their immune system also doesn't function as well. So we've got the National Institute of Health is now out taking a look at whether they could use space as a research tool to give them more insight in bone loss in the elderly and give them more insight in immune system degradation in the elderly. So there's a potential here with space station as a different environment, because all the things we test in laboratories on the ground, we see them with 1G bias. In other words, one gravity is affecting the cells, affecting the way the molecular activities occur internal to the cells. When we go to space, we remove that 1G phenomena. Now we're in 0G. It gives the researcher now a different way to look at that same cell and how it operates in 0G, which ultimately lets them build a better model for the cell, which will actually help them understand the more fundamental processes of what's going on. And then ultimately that will be able to help the elderly and potentially in bone loss, immunology. Also, they have trouble with stability. Our astronauts also had the same problem with neurovestibular activities when they get back. We're doing some things with salmonella research. We think we can use the unique property that cells seem to create more different variations in space. For some reason, we were able to down select a particular salmonella vaccine a particular salmonella organism that's strong enough to create the immune system reaction to provide resistance, but it's not strong enough to actually give you salmonella. They were able to then select off the right genes that they saw from the samples in space, and now they're potentially going to be able to go manufacture that on the ground. And it's going to go into FDA trials here in the next couple months. So there may be a salmonella vaccine that comes out of the unique properties that the viruses and bacteria do in space. And what's interesting is we don't know why it does it in space. So then we've got a group now at Arizona that's trying to understand why this phenomenon occurs in space. But this company doesn't really care why it happens. They're just going to exploit that phenomenon in space and develop a new vaccine, because it's another way of like going to Africa to find more potential drug candidates. It's a way to use space to go do that. So I think the things we need to do from a NASA perspective is we need to figure out a way that we get our message out so folks understand how we're more relevant to their day-to-day life, and they can see the connection. They see the big things, they see the big vision when we go to Moon, Mars, they see that exploration, they see that leadership, that optimism that we have that pushes us towards this new future. Those are all good things, but then I think we need to underpin that with a little bit more of the more practical, mundane things that have now become essentially not understood by the population in general. They just take them for granted when they get in their car, turn on the GPS, or they grab a cell phone, or they get weather predictions, that it really is coming from space. So I think we as a community need to do better at letting them know what's going on so they can see some value of what we're doing that meets their daily needs. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Bill. Thanks for coming and for also providing, giving awards out today to some of our challenge owners and team members that really participated in conducting this first pilot phase. But before we go there, I want to recognize a few guests that we have with us today. First, Doug Comstock's here from NASA headquarters. Doug, you want to raise your hand or stand up there? Doug heads up the Innovative Partnership Program in the Office of Chief Technologist. We also have some other guests. Bev Godwin's here from the General Services Administration. Bev got the task of putting a platform in place for the entire federal government in about 60 days, which is challenge.gov that's out there. And you'll hear the background to that in just a few minutes. Robin Sturm's going to give us a few notes about how the administration is viewing prizes across the whole federal government, and then we'll do our awards. We have guests from Innocentive here, John Fredrickson, Lisa Reinhold, Eli Madrigal, and Steve Domek. If you guys would stand up down here. And we had a really good lessons learned debrief this morning, so that we'll be getting that out in a report that we can distribute to everyone. And it's very rich in terms of how we use these tools in the future. It'll be great. So with that, Robin's going to give us just a couple of points about prizes in general across the administration. Robin Sturm is currently the Assistant Deputy Chief Technology Officer at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Essentially, I translate that into being in charge of challenges and prizes for across the federal government. And in the past, she's been a law clerk at the Senate Judiciary Committee. She graduated from Yale University and Yale Law School. So, Robin?
Good morning. So it's a great pleasure to be here in Houston this morning. You see, as part of my job in the White House is to serve as an evangelist for prizes, challenges, and open innovation, and to talk with federal agencies across the executive branch about the President's commitment to increase the use of these innovative tools to spur innovation. And I often start my speeches with an example of a visionary agency that has used a prize or a challenge to unearth a breakthrough solution or to find an unlikely solver at a fraction of the cost. And I urge the federal employees that are sitting in the audience to follow in the footsteps of this groundbreaking team. But now you see why I'm so thrilled to be here, because the visionary agency, in my very best examples, are at NASA. And the groundbreaking team and many of the best examples are right here at Johnson Space Center. Your work has inspired and empowered your peers across the federal government. For that, I thank you. And I'm looking forward to continuing to learn from the innovators who will be honored here today. So for those of you who are new to prizes and challenges, let me start with a little bit of background. The approach flows from a principle known as Joy's Law, which is that regardless of where you work, whether it's in NASA or whether it's in the White House or somewhere else in a Fortune 500 company, most of the smartest people on the planet work for someone else. And this realization requires a fundamental shift in the way that an institution solves problems. Prizes and challenges can be part of the solution. So prizes and challenges can take many different forms, but there are three key aspects to the type of prizes and challenges that I want to talk about today. So one is that a sponsor will identify, frame, or articulate a key problem that they want to solve. The second is that they present that problem to a large number of solvers. And three, that they provide incentives for them to solve the problem on a specific time frame. So when designed appropriately, these types of prizes and challenges can offer the government a number of unique benefits over traditional contracts or grants. And I want to go through just a couple of them here. So one is that prizes and challenges allow a government agency to be able to articulate a goal without having to predict either the team or the approach that will be most likely to succeed. This is incredibly empowering because it means that instead of having to look to proposals about what an entity says it can do, to their credentials, to their track record, instead you can judge entities completely 100% on their results. And this allows agencies to be able to find untapped talent and to look towards disruptive innovation that otherwise would have been overlooked by traditional processes. The second is that prizes and challenges increase both the number and the diversity of solvers. And I want to take both of these separately. So it increases the number of solvers, and that's important because it allows agencies to get beyond the usual suspects that already know how to navigate the tricky systems and acronyms of doing business with government, whether that be through grants or contracts, and to be able to get to small, innovative individuals and companies that have never before navigated those systems. Second, it allows for a greater diversity of solvers. And that's important because, as Jeff said, there's been some fantastic research happening at Harvard Business School where Harvard Business School professors have found in analyzing hundreds of competitions that there's a very high correlation between breakthrough solutions and marginal solvers. So solvers who are either on the edge of a specific technical expertise or in another discipline altogether, and therefore can take a problem and essentially flip it on its head, look at it from a completely new perspective, and bring new experiences and ideas to bear on that particular problem. So the third that I want to emphasize is that it allows government agencies to pay only for results. So with a prize or a competition, the agency is able to articulate specific criteria for the solutions for which they're looking for. And if no one meets that criteria, the agency does not need to pay a single penny. And that's incredibly powerful in an era where often contracts and grants can be behind schedule or over budget, and yet the government continues to write checks. Finally, prizes and challenges have a unique power to capture the imagination and to change the perception of what's possible. And that can be a very useful tool for not only creating a new market, but also building a set of consumers, as Bill mentioned, for a set of technologies that you see being important to the future. So a recent McKinsey report found that the benefits of prizes and challenges are not lost on the private sector. in part catalyzed by some of the new crowdsourcing technologies that Bill mentioned. Investments in prize competitions in the private sector have witnessed a significant uptick in recent years. But the public sector has traditionally been slower to reap the benefits of these open innovation strategies. The Obama administration's committed to change that. So on his very first day in office, the president issued the Memorandum on Open Government and Transparency, setting out new principles for the way the government works. Recognizing that the problems of the 21st century are too great to be solved by government alone, he called for all hands on deck. Recognizing that Washington does not have a monopoly on the best ideas, he called for agencies to tap the top talent and expertise wherever it may lie. 1 year ago, in the President's Strategy for American Innovation, he expanded on these principles to explicitly call on agencies to increase their use of prizes and challenges to solve tough problems. And in March, the White House issued guidance to the heads of every single agency, reaffirming the President's commitment to this problem-solving approach and providing a policy and legal framework to guide agencies in using prizes and challenges to stimulate innovation and to advance their core missions. Just last month, the White House and the General Services Administration, with Bev's leadership, launched challenge.gov, which is a one-stop shop where entrepreneurs, innovators, and citizen solvers can compete for prestige and prizes by bringing novel solutions to tough national problems, large and small. Congress, too, has acknowledged the value of prizes and challenges to spur innovation. In July, the Senate Commerce Committee reported the America Competes Reauthorization Act of 2010 out of committee with a section devoted to prizes. It would essentially expand the explicit prize authority that only a few agencies have, including NASA, to the entire executive branch. As a result, the past 6 months have witnessed a flurry of experimentation in this space. At launch alone, challenge.gov featured 35 challenges posed by more than 15 agencies. As just a couple examples, before the ink had even dried on the memorandum that came out in March, the First Lady announced a new challenge that would help in her campaign to end childhood obesity by calling on kid-savvy innovators from the far regions of the country to build games and applications that would motivate and empower kids to eat healthier and be more physically active. Just last week, the President announced a new privately funded prize to reward, recognize, and inspire excellence in community colleges. And last month, the winners of the Automotive X Prize were announced. That's a $10 million award for cars that can exceed 100 miles per gallon, or the equivalent. That's an interesting model because the prize purse was actually put up by a company. The prize was implemented by a foundation, but the Department of Energy played a key role in validation and judging of the winners. But despite all of this, no agency has done more than NASA. From the work that's being done here at Johnson Space Center to the incredible Centennial challenges that Doug leads. And the teams that have been doing that work here at NASA are brilliant, committed, and tireless in all that they do. Your work in this space is not only delivering results for NASA, but paving the way for agencies across the executive branch to follow in your footsteps. And not only with the specific pilots that you're doing on Topcoder and Ascentive yet to come and others, but also in the way that you're thinking deeply about the roles of these tools in a comprehensive innovation strategy. So for that, the White House is deeply grateful for all that you've done, and we can't wait to see what you do next. So as you continue to experiment, to take risks, and to integrate an open, innovative approach into your operational framework, you know you will have an enthusiastic champions in the White House moving forward. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks, Robin. Appreciate that very much, and it's a great introduction then to what we want to do here is recognize folks who ran challenges on behalf of the Space Life Sciences Directorate, but also at the Glenn Research Center, at the Langley Research Center, and with engineering here also at the Johnson Space Center. So if I could, I'm going to ask Mr. Bill Gerstenmaier to come back up so that we can hand out the certificates. And we have a number of folks to recognize. We did not have a dry run, so bear with us here because there are a lot of names to read out. I don't think everyone's necessarily here, so that I'll just pause for a moment, see if people are moving in this direction. What I would like to say is that we're going to take just one picture at the end of a group picture rather than a lot of individual photos. So when you come up and get your certificate, if you would just come down back off the stage, but stay in the first couple of rows, and we'll take one group picture at the end. So let's see, do I have the slides, or are you? Okay. Okay, that worked. So the first two folks I'd like to have come up, a couple of folks who are really taking charge of the open innovation pilots and put in many, many hours, would be Jennifer Fogarty and Cindy Rando to come up and be recognized. And as they mentioned, we have put a number of hours into this program. We hope the learnings are going to help us do this in a much more accelerated fashion in the future. And we're going to recognize a lot of folks today who've helped put it in place. You know, you don't do this with just technical support alone. We do this with a team, and it's really important to have a team of folks who can help put the contracts in place, review the results, and they span many different disciplines. So next, let's see if this is working. I'd like to recognize two folks from the legal department, if they're here, Ted Rowe and Randy Surratt, if they're here. Please come up. I have to give Randy a hard time. We said, you know, all roads pass through Randy, so whether it's the contract or the results of the awards. So Randy's been a real key in helping us get these put in place. And Ted was invaluable on the front end and also with intellectual property issues. So that's quite a job. Three folks from the procurement office. You have to put contracts in place to do this. So I'd like if Ann Bronson, Keith Hutto, and Lamar Mueller are here, please come on up, be recognized. Looks like Keith and Lamar are here, so thanks very much. Appreciate the help.
Ann was riding a bicycle and broke her wrist.
Oh, no. Okay. So Ann had a bicycle accident, apparently. A couple of folks we work with at Innocentive we'd like to have come up and receive a certificate. That's Steve Domek and Lisa Reinhold that we really depended on to get that pilot program in place. And Eugene Buff could not be with us from yet2.com, so we'll make sure we get this to Eugene. Okay, now we would like to get into the challenge owners themselves, and this was a very diverse group across 3 centers. We were very pleased to actually have multi-center participation. Ultimately, I'd like to see all 10 centers participating, and that's actually, we're beginning to see that happening with NASA at Work, which is the internal challenge platform. But we had some folks willing to step out and take some risks, as Bill mentioned, about trying some new approaches. And so I'll slow these down just a bit so we can get the challenge owners up in particular. But the first one is Melvin Farabee, who's here with us from Langley. And this was for coordination of sensor swarms for extraterrestrial research. And this was really about getting sensors to coordinate their activities so you get multiple data takes from different perspectives. The next challenge I think I'll call up would be, it's called Data-Driven Forecasting of Solar Events, and that's Dan Fry and Neil Zapp from the Johnson Space Center. And we refer to this one as our home run. Neil and Dan put out a challenge that resulted in an algorithm to predict a solar flare. The challenge was from 4 to 24 hours with 50% accuracy, and we now have one that is 8 hours at 85% accuracy. So as they've begun to play with the model, it's actually more accurate than what was originally turned in. So this is a great step forward on solar flare monitoring. Next was improved barrier layers, keeping food fresh in space. Michelle Pershonik. Michelle's here. And this actually resulted in finding a flexible graphite material from Belgium, I think it was, and the solver was actually from Russia in materials science. So this was one of those kind of global reach issues, but very surprising that this was not a material that you would normally think of for food packaging. And I'm sorry, I missed one person on the slide. Eric Vetteler is also a colleague of Melvin's. He's not here today, but he was part of the Melvin's Challenge. And the last on this page is the mechanism for a compact aerobic and resistive exercise device, Linda Lurch. For this particular challenge, this was taking the space we had available on the Orion capsule, which was 1 cubic foot and 20 pounds, and finding an exercise device that would work. And we essentially got the same vacuum-based technology back that we have on the ARED, but something that would work in this dimension. So thanks to all those folks very much. As you know, we're now closing phase 2. We have not made official awards yet, so we don't have specifics to really talk about, but we are actually making awards for all 3 challenges in this arena as well. So we've had the good fortune to make either full or partial awards in all first of the 7 challenges for incentives. That's just an excellent result for what we ran. So I'd like to call up folks from the Medical Consumables Tracking, David Bauman from Johnson Space Center, and I don't know if Devon Griffin is here from Glenn, but David's here. Next is the Simple Microgravity Laundry System, Jim Broyan. I don't know if Jim's here from engineering. Yeah, there's Jim. This was a great challenge looking at ways to put a better laundry system in place to be more efficient, more effective with how we provide clothes for the astronauts. And the last one on this page that finishes phase 2 with incentive is augmenting the exercise experience with audiovisual inputs. And that's Lauren Levitin and Christian Otto. I saw Lauren. And I see Christian moving to the side. So this was a challenge to try to see if we could come up with motivational techniques for the exercise experience. So I'd next like to recognize, and we'll just read the folks off. There were so many folks who helped with the challenge owners that we didn't have time today to actually put these in all of the different challenge categories, but we want everyone to be recognized. So as I read down this list, if you're here, please move towards the stage and accept your certificate. Ken Dudley from Langley. Caprice Harris from Glenn Legal. Kenny Jones from Langley. Ken Lotting from Langley. Kevin McNeil from the Johnson Space Center. Here's Kevin. And these are all the folks who helped with the incentives phase 1 challenges that you just saw. So we really appreciate all the work that folks put in. Nathaniel Newby, is Nathaniel here? Okay, Lori Platt-Snyder, is she here this morning? And Christopher Sheehan from Glenn. Okay, well, let's give all those folks a round of applause. We figured it might be tough to get everybody here, especially the day after a holiday, but that's the way it turned out. Next, I'll again read these names. These are phase 2 incentive champions: Melissa Borrego, David Carrick from Glenn, Doug Fikema from Glenn, Catherine Keaton from Johnson Space Center. Is Catherine here? Okay. Charles Niederhaus, Evelyn Orndorff, Karen Pickering, Camille Shea, Karen Weiland, and Kanapathipi Wignaraja. I had to practice that one a couple of times. I hope I got close. Let's give those folks a round of applause. And we'll make sure they get their certificates. Next, we're going to move into a different set of challenges. These were with yet to come. This is very different from the prize challenge offering from Incentive. These are really, we call them a technical matchmaker. They match organizations to your organization to see if they have a solution. We got some very, very good leads from this process in many different disciplines where an organization may actually have a solution for us. And I know we have some of the folks here this morning. Is Mark Ott here from JSC? I don't see Mark, but that was for a system for qualitative analysis of microorganisms and their taxonomic classification to improve our on-orbit detection of and identification of bacteria. So Mark really did a nice job with that. It feels like he got some very good results. Next is Eddie Simonis. Is Eddie's here? Okay, great. And this is for radioprotectants for humans exposed to chronic and acute radiation. And what we're learning from these challenges is not just the result, but an emerging body of best practices of how do these work and how do we best deploy these tools for market surveys to help inform how we might do research announcements in the future. So lots of other intangibles we'll be getting out in a report. And next is Jean Sabanga. Jean's here. I think Jean had a great result also. This was for accurate bone measurement techniques for deep bone density structure. This is really trying to find a tool that we can use in space to look at the architecture of bone, which of course we can't right now. And so Jean, I think, got 5 very good leads off of this project as well. So again, for the Phase 1 champions, I'll just read the names off of folks that contributed to these challenges. If they're here, please come up and be recognized. Dan Gazda, Bill Thompson from Glenn, Wing Wong from JSC Wiley. Okay. And Aaron Yotes, also from Wiley. On this next page, we'll wait till sorry, wait. I should have mentioned several people participated in Incentive and various yet-to-come challenges. So we only have one certificate for you, so if you've already been up, you can just wait if your name gets called again for participating. So Dave Bauman and Melvin Farabee also ran yet-to-come challenges, and we appreciate that very much. Devon Griffin, I know, is not here. Joel Levine from Langley. And Michelle Pershonik, we recognize already. So thank you again very much for. Maya Cooper, is Maya here? John Eustace, and Devon's not here, from Glenn. Kimberly Late, is she here? Mark Savina, and John Zoldak. Let's give those folks a round of applause. And top coder, I'll read these names. I think maybe just come down and accept as a group. The top coder experiment, several folks were very key to this. Bara Reina helped spearhead that. Mary Ferrer de Carvalho also was key. Doug Butler, everybody on this list, but just did a tremendous job. The top coder was slightly different in that this was an open source competition to look at an algorithm to improve our medical kits. And so it was all about writing an optimization algorithm in that competition. So congratulations to this team. So Bara Reina just came up and Doug Butler's coming up. I don't know if Mary's here. I think she wasn't able to make it. Vacation. So let's give this team a round of applause. And let's see, Dave Bauman has been up already. Let's see if the other folks are here. Grandin Bickham from Wiley. Jen Fogarty's up here. Charles Menard. Okay. Jerry Myers. Denise Pico. Elizabeth Richard was part of the team. Lynn Sale. Madurai Sriram, I'm sorry. Marley Walton, and Leonard Yao. So let's give those folks a round of applause. And I have one more category. I think a few folks might be here. You heard us mention NASA at work. This process is still going on, so we don't have results. We haven't closed challenges to analyze it, but it's using the same incentive platform, but looking internally. And so we're now running challenges across the agency, and we had just a very short debrief about that this morning. But what's fascinating is hundreds of people are signing up to look at the challenges at multiple centers. And so what we're really interested in is who's looking at what challenge. And I think it's going to be a fascinating cross-look across the agency to say, 300 people from Ames were working on a JSC challenge, or 200 people at Marshall were working on a JSC challenge, or vice versa. So we really want to understand how that ended up working across. What were the disciplines? What challenges did they pick? It'd be a very nice way to connect some folks that maybe didn't know each other or hadn't worked on a problem together before. So we're anxious to close those challenges out by the end of the year and have those results, which I think would be fantastic. But to get that up and running, it took, again, an infrastructure to do that, and several folks worked on that. Is Dave Bergner here from Ames? I don't think Dave's here. Chris Bertignoli from Marshall. Lynn Bucco from Johnson Space Center. Gamaliel Cherry from Langley. Okay. Valerie King from Johnson Space Center. Joel Levine from Langley. Raymond Mitchell from Johnson Space Center. Gail Peruzic from Glenn. Gregory Schrambo. And Keith Winters from Marsh. Keith's here. Okay, great. These folks really helped with a significant aspect of getting the challenge platform in place. There were many issues to solve. How could the incentive platform communicate to all 10 centers? Where was the data going to be stored? On what server? Lots of issues to solve for data security and things. So really appreciate these folks and the effort they put in to get this pilot up and running. And again, Jen Fogarty and Cindy Rando did a tremendous job on very short notice, very short amount of time to get this in place. So by the end of the Open Innovation Challenges, we will have closed 34 different challenges, 20 for NASA at work across the agency, 7 on incentive externally, 6 on yet to come, and 1 on top coder. So really a phenomenal body of work for us to look at to see how this works in the future. And the last step is we really are going to try to put this in a framework, a decision-making framework of how best to use these tools. So give everyone another round of applause. Oh, I'm sorry, I had one more slide that I missed. The NASA at Work banner, which you can see here, communicate, collaborate, come together, that is being used across the agency. And that was Jeffrey Brief from Wiley. So. I didn't turn over the last page. So again, thanks to everyone who participated. It's really been a lot of work, but it's been fun. We're now starting to see the results. And we hope to make these tools more easy to deploy in the future so that we can generate results in all our different disciplines. So again, for the award winners, if you'd stay, and we'll take a group picture. And then thank you all for coming. We appreciate it very much. And Bill, thanks for being here. That was great.